one of the things that I think that is really incredible about what the Ruby world has done in the last few years is they've come together around Rack, which is sort of their version of WSGI, and as a result, there's a bunch of these different Rack servers, which means that now instead of the one true way of deploying Rails, there's now a bunch of good options. And I think that a bunch of options wins out over one true way anytime. Now this applies to language choice too, right? I mentioned I use Chef even though it's not in Python. There are configuration management tools written in Python. There's something called, I think it's BCFG2. I took a look at it because it was in Python. Configuration files are written in XML. I'm just not going to go there. I do not have the patience to write XML. There's something called Koki, Kokki, which appears to be a port of Chef into Python. But if it's just a straight port, why wouldn't I just use the original? It's always going to lag behind. Meanwhile, in the Ruby world, there's both Puppet and Chef. So if I teach myself enough about configuration management and enough about Ruby to sort of float in those tools, if Puppet pisses me off, which it did, I can switch to Chef. So, and if Chef pisses me off again, I can switch back. So I'm floating in a world where there's options. I get to be impatient. And I think Python developers tend to understand the sort of pragmatism about tool choice. Back when the Python core team was trying to decide, they knew they needed to switch to a distributed version control system, and they were trying to decide which one. And in the PEP outlining why they chose Mercurial, they talked about choosing Mercurial just because it's written in Python over Git. Those are the two finalists, were Mercurial and Git. They said choosing Mercurial just because it's written in Python is a bad decision, right? All else being equal, it's fine to choose a tool written in the language you know. But if all else isn't equal, you should pick the better tool for the job. And they went on to explain why they thought Mercurial was a better fit for their workflow. But to me, that completely epitomizes the way that I approach tool choice. All else being equal, I'm going to choose Python because I know Python really well. But in the case of something like configuration management, all else isn't equal. The Python choices just aren't equivalent enough for me to want to rely on them. Again, you know this, no silver bullet, right? Python is not the be-all and end-all, neither is Django. You have to evaluate your tools judiciously, balance the comfort of using something you already know against the right tool for the job. And that brings us to hubris. So hubris is excessive pride. That's the bad side. But because we're all prideful developers, we want to write code that other developers will praise. There's another way of saying this. It's imagine that the person who has your job after you is a serial killer who knows where you live. In other words, we all want to write code for whatever reason, serial killer, hubris, what have you. We all want to write code that other people will like and will compliment and will use. My partner, Frank, my business partner, I remember him telling a group of people in a meeting this little, how to tell if you have a good sysadmin. And he said, the way you know you have a really great sysadmin is you come in one day and you ask around and you go, has anyone seen Alex? I haven't seen him in like a couple of days. And everyone's like, yeah, I think I might have seen him Friday, maybe it was Thursday. No one can find him. His office is locked. The lights are off. Finally, you get maintenance to open the door, and inside on his whiteboard is, gone to Tahiti, back sometime. And you realize, you know what? Who cares? The servers are running. I can do everything I need to do. I don't need that guy. The best sysadmin, Frank says, is someone who makes themselves obsolete. On the flip side of that, who's had to say something like this? Sorry, can't deploy, don't know how. The deployment guy is out to lunch, or I'm new here. I haven't, I don't know how to fix this bug yet. as a deployment engineer, this sort of thing makes your developers hate you, right? If one person is holding the keys to the servers, developers will hate you because they'll fix a bug and their boss will ask them, why isn't it live yet? And they'll say, I can't find Alex. That's awful, and it makes developers hate you. Hubris says we should try to make our developers love us. We should try to make everyone we work with love us. And that implies what I think might be the cardinal rule of DevOps, which is that nobody's special. Everyone at your company, at least everyone who is sort of organizationally allowed, ought to be able to deploy in exactly the same way, right? I'm clearly not saying that just because someone has a card key, they ought to be able to, have the keys to the server to deploy. But what I am saying is, if it's in your job description to be able to have things running on the site, you should have the keys to deploying. And the deployment tool should be written in such a way that on day one you can say, here's your card key, here's your email password, the kitchen is over there, and here's how to deploy. The other place where hubris plays into our roles as DevOps engineers is when we're designing for scale. Now, we all know that there are very few Twitters, there are very few Facebooks, and that realistically our startups just not going to get that big. We also know Knuth's rule against premature optimization. So when you're sitting in that first meeting, you've got your business guy and your one developer, and you're sketching these wild plans for how your servers are going to scale, that's hubris, my friends. That's major hubris. You're planning, you've just gotten your little Y Combinator bootstrap startup money, and you're planning to be the next Facebook. And you know what? If hubris is a good thing, we should all be doing this. Remember, Knuth didn't say that all premature optimization is evil. He said that most of the time, we should ignore small optimizations. Planning for scale is not a small optimization, and frankly, it's not particularly complicated. If we take no premature optimization too far, we could use it as an argument against unit testing. We could say, why should I test my code? I don't know that it has bugs. That's premature optimization to see if my code has bugs in it, right? I think that prematurely planning for scale is precisely what we should be doing. Granted, we should be balancing it in the same way that we balance whether we're optimizing code that we write. Let me give you some examples of what I mean by this. If you automate your code from day one, even when you have one server and one revision, it helps you grow. It means that when you do take off, you can make that happen much quicker. The first few things I commit, my sort of skeleton repository for a new project includes a fab file. Most of the time it's empty for the first dozen, 100, whatever commits, but it's there. The first time I need to automate something, I have somewhere for it. There's no barrier to automation. You need to really do whatever you can to avoid what I call n equals 1, right? Avoid having a special server, right? We all know about sort of shared nothing as developers. Don't assume anything about our hardware. But we also really can't assume that any particular machine is special. We had one special machine at the Lawrence Journal World that had been set up many years sort of pre-having any sort of rational deployment environment. And that thing continued to serve the front page of the website after the entire rest of the stack was moved to what became Django. There was this one page still being served out of mod Perl because no one knew exactly what was happening on the home page, and it only ran on that one server. Oh, and did I mention it was a VA Linux box, the company that went out of business and stopped selling hardware like years before. Avoid this. From the very beginning, don't make any assumptions about what your hardware is. Make it, even if you can't do cloud deployment, even if you have to be deploying onto physical machines in a cage somewhere, try to treat them as if they are intangible resources like a cloud machine that you can, re-provision repeatedly as needed. Make it possible for yourself. Again, one of the first things I do when I set up a new machine is try to put all my configuration through Chef. And sometimes I'm sloppy about it. Sometimes I really have to get stuff done and I don't quite get it right. But give yourself that option, right?